Welcome to Marriage Matters. My name is Rabbi Schonbuch. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist based in Brooklyn and around the world via Skype. We are continuing today our series on a new book called Think Good and It Will Be Good, a book I wrote a few months and published a few months ago to talk about the importance of positive thinking in the context of the Torah and under the shadow, so to speak, of Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was a Holocaust survivor, who survived Auschwitz and wrote one of the most profound books of the 20th century called Man's Search for Meaning. Many people have heard of this book, Man's Search for Meaning. If you haven't read the book, you have to go out and buy it. It's a small little book. It's an amazing thing how I start my book. I talked about finding his book. I went in 1989. I was in a bookstore in Manhattan, and I was looking for something for Shabbat. So something on the Parsha or something. Rabbi Tursky was writing books then, a while ago. And I wasn't looking for this book, but as I was walking to the Parsha section, I saw this little book, I think it was in the Jewish history section, a little Holocaust book called Man's Search for Meaning. And it's a little tiny book, it had a candle on it. There's only about 140, 150 pages. So I don't usually like Holocaust books because I find them very sad and depressing. I've read many, but I don't want to spend a lot of time every Shabbat reading Holocaust books. I'll read them once in a while. So I picked this up thinking that I wouldn't read it, but I was just captivated by his words. It wasn't just a book about the tragedies. It was a book about how to survive tragedy, how to overcome in the face of what Frankl called inescapable suffering. Despite one's suffering, how does one overcome it? So the first part of the book is about his experiences in the concentration camp. Camps, actually, he's in 3 camps. What's unique about his approach is he talks as a psychiatrist trying to help people in the camps. People think that he developed his theories in the Shoah and the Holocaust. Viktor Frankl developed his theories in the 1920s, long before the war. He proved it in the camps. And he claimed at the time that those in the camps who had an orientation towards the future, a positive orientation towards the future, meaning they believed, and of course they wouldn't know if it would come true, but they believed that they were going to fulfill a meaning in their future, had a greater chance of living. And there are stories about how he would encourage people who are ready to commit suicide to focus on fulfilling future goals after perhaps the camps would be over and the war, the Germans would be, the survivors would be liberated, that they would fulfill something meaningful. There was a time when Viktor Frankl was walking on a death march, and if you slipped or fell, and they didn't have shoes on in the middle of the winter, and if you fell, you would be shot. So in delirium and exhaustion and starvation, he had to stay awake at all costs. And suddenly, while he was facing this inescapable suffering, he transported himself to the future, going back to his university hospital classroom, giving a lecture on the psychology of the concentration camps. He turned the moment into a lecture in his mind. He claims it kept him alive. Another time he had a disease called typhus, which you die from typhus if you don't get medical care. And there was very little medical care, of course, in Auschwitz. And he had to keep himself awake unless he would face cardiovascular collapse. So he had to keep himself awake the entire night during his 104 fever. So what did he do? He wrote a book called The Doctor and the Soul before the concentration camps, which would tell you everything about Viktor Frankl. It was a doctor and the neshama. He wrote this in the 1920s. But the Nazis took his manuscript he had with them and they burnt it. They destroyed it. His life's work, his magnum opus, was burnt by the Nazis. But it saved his life because the night he was dying of typhus, he recreated the book and he stole little scraps of paper, bartered for them. I don't know how he got it. And he wrote on, and we have pictures of his scraps of paper, rewriting his book. And he claimed that rewriting his book, you imagine you have to rewrite something, your thesis in university, or his great book. He had to rewrite it. But it was the act of rewriting that book which kept him alive. And that, for me, was a great principle in psychology, that one has to have a future orientation. I'll tell you an amazing thing. I had a client who is suffering from terrible depression, really profound, classic depression. You read about this in the textbooks. And I've been seeing him for months. And he wasn't getting better. But he started to get better after a few sessions. I introduced him to the works of Viktor Frankl. I switched the discussion from his early childhood towards what could he accomplish with his life. It's interesting, Viktor Frankl said, paradoxically, is something called hyper-reflection. Therapy will cause this. Too much focus on self causes more depression. So Viktor Frankl said that if somebody's depressed, focus on things beyond the self. It's an amazing thing, because most of modern psychotherapy is practiced today is all about yourself. You're going to talk about yourself. So whether you're doing cognitive behavioral therapy, talking about your cognitions and beliefs about yourself, or you're going through EMDR, working through your traumas, you're talking about yourself. Frankl said you're missing half the picture. There's the self, but then there's something greater than the self. So he wanted people to concentrate on things beyond themselves. And this person that had depression, I was doing that earlier work in his childhood and the traumas he'd suffered, but he was still depressed. But I started shifting towards, okay, so now what are you going to accomplish despite your depression? That word despite sums up all of logotherapy, all of Viktor Frankl's psychology. Despite one's conditions, what will I do with it? Is a question all of us have faced, with children at risk, with difficult family situations, with disease, with illness. What do we do despite our conditions? And Frankl said that we have the unique human ability, an attitudinal ability to choose our attitude towards our suffering. When we're facing inescapable suffering, when I walked in today, we're talking about a person that had an illness, a physical illness, paraplegia, quadriplegia, paralysis. Sometimes suffering is inescapable, but he says we still have the human freedom to choose our attitude towards it. And that's the theme of tonight's class is think good, it will be good. To choose one's attitude is the unique human ability we have to face inescapable situations and despite them, form a new paradigm about life, take on a new vision despite our conditions. And that's what Frankl claimed would pull us out of where we are, pull us beyond ourselves. He always uses the mashal, so to speak. You can't just put your hand behind yourself and lift yourself out of the chair. It doesn't work. You have to have something greater than yourself. You need a rope. You have to ascend by holding on to something higher than yourself. That higher than yourself is your vision. That's your attitude. That's your goal. That's your focus on finding meaning in life. So being happy is not simply waking up one day and saying, I want to be happy. It doesn't work. This is what Frankl said too. He says the more you pursue happiness or pleasure, the more it runs away from you. The more you pursue meaning, happiness and pleasure ensue. Ensue means follow. So don't get fooled by pop psychology that says try to be happy. You need to have something higher than yourself. You have to fulfill meaning. You have to have what the Torah calls hashkafa. You have to have a view of the world in order to pull yourself beyond the world. So let's take a look now at how does one become happier? How does one actually do this? Because modern psychology has only talked about this over the last, 30 years. Positive psychology. It's all these groups on positive thinking people are attending. It's all coming from the positive psychology movement. But it turns out that the Tzemach Tzedek, a great Hasidic master, over 200 years ago, addressed this very issue. And I believe it's one of his in-laws came, and he was depressed, and he was feeling tremendous anxiety. Now, there's a letter which he actually wrote to his in-law to cheer him up. And that formed the basis of my book, Think It Will Be Good. I want to read to you parts of the letter to understand how the Tzemach Tzedek looked at happiness. And he said, a person should request from God to experience happiness of his soul. As mentioned in the saying, make the soul of your servant happy, from Tehillim. An amazing thing. A person should request to Kadosh Baruch Hu, let me experience happiness. I mean, that's a bakasha request. I don't usually read anywhere else, but Tzemach Tzedek suggested it. And he also should ask Hashem to remove his feelings of sadness and helplessness, as we read in the Siddur. He should also avoid causing himself distress, since a person has the ability to avoid arousing negative feelings. Proof of this approach can be found in the commandment to not fear going to war, as it is written. It says, Ki tetzeh l'milchama, when one goes out to war, v'ra'isa sus v'rechev, and you see a sus, a horse, and a chariot, Rav mimcha, and a nation greater than yourself, lo sira. It says, do not be afraid. So the Tzemach Tzedek is saying that the ability to be happy, we can learn from that pasuk. The ability to arouse states of happiness is shown from the pasuk. What is this referring to? He asks the question. It's such a strange thing to tell people to do. If anybody's been in war, any of the Chayalim of Eretz Yisrael, the soldiers of Israel, or any American soldiers, I would imagine, despite telling them not to be afraid, they're going to be afraid when they go to war. It's almost impossible to have no fear at all when facing weapons firing at you. So the Tzemach Tzedek asks the question, how is it possible the Torah could command us, lo sira, do not be afraid, when it's a human reaction to be afraid? Torah cannot command us to do something that's impossible. Rather, he says that it must mean that despite what we are facing, we can choose to arouse feelings of happiness, despite our fear. The commandment is not to have no fear, it's not to arouse more fear, is to distract our thoughts from what we fear, because we might just fear it naturally, and to focus on a greater sense of happiness. And the explanation is as follows. A person has three garments of his soul: thought, speech, and action. Machshava, dibur, and maisa. A person can think something. Speech is also kinui for feeling, and they could do something. Even if his heart is afraid, says the Tzemach Tzedek, he is able to remove his thought, speech, and actions from his fears. And most importantly, not to speak about them, but rather do the opposite, as is written in the Tanya chapter 14. In this way we are commanded to not be afraid of them. This implies that we shouldn't think about fear at all. So the commandment is not to fear. We're going to fear in war, but we shouldn't think about the fear. It's going to come as a consequence. Yet he believes, as Viktor Frankl was saying, lahavdil, Viktor Frankl wasn't a rabbi, he was showing psychologically, and I came at this as a psychologist studying his work, he's saying despite one's conditions, one can choose one's attitude. One does not have to delve into the fear. Despite the fear, one could delve one's mind into other things. And he comments as follows, and he instructs us immediately. As he stops thinking about them, his fear will become nullified. At this point, his fears will be similar to one who is sleeping, who doesn't have any feelings at that moment. After several days, the fear will totally be gone, and these foreign thoughts will not be considered. The reason for this ability is that through removing your thoughts, fear will also disappear. So the Tzemach Tzedek is saying, a person is where his mind is. So if I place my mind on this, I will not be fearing this. The mind can only contain so much information. I mean, we have a memory of billions and billions of memories in our mind, billions and billions of megs, so to speak, gigabytes in our head of memory. However, we're only going to concentrate on one thing or another at any given time. I know people can multitask, right? Some people are good at it, but we're talking in a psychological state. Most of us are feeling happy, we're feeling sad. We're not feeling happy and sad all the time. We're focusing on one thing. I want to give you a tremendous, another of my great heroes of psychology and psychiatry. If you want to read a great book, one of the best books ever written in psychology, perhaps you don't know this, it's called Choice Theory by William Glasser. I'll give you my secret books that inspired my life and it helped me change people's life. Viktor Frankl is one of them, Man's Search for Meaning. Another book is William Glasser's Choice Theory. He was a psychiatrist who didn't believe in medication. Glasser, G-L-A-S-S-E-R, William Glasser. He was Jewish. He lived in California. And he practiced what he called choice theory, reality therapy. He said depression is a choice. You choose to depress or you choose to anxietize. He never accepted it as verbs, as nouns, but as verbs. He never would say, are you depressed? He'd say, are you depressing right now? He called it an action depression, an action anxiety. There's a big debate. People disagreed with him, but he's a fascinating theories. But he basically claimed that a person, and he proved it, even if he's experiencing profound depression, can be helped. And I've seen this with my own eyes. Here's the example he gives, and I tell all my clients. Imagine one day a person's feeling really depressed, and he's feeling really sad. And you know when you're feeling depressed and sad, everything looks bad. You become negative, you become pessimistic, everything is dark and gray, nothing turns out, you're catastrophizing. You're in your worst possible mood, you're feeling absolutely miserable. And suddenly a person, one of your best friends from high school calls up and says, David, Rivka, How are you feeling today? I haven't talked to you in 20 years. It's so nice to talk to you. I just saw your name somewhere. I decided to give you a call and say hello. And you start talking to your friend, and he starts reminding you about the teachers you used to get in trouble with, and the times where you played hooky, and how you used to laugh at other kids, and how you used to have fun at night, how you went to camp together. How do you think the person feels? Even the most depressed person. Amazing. It's real science. Honest, good science. If a person suddenly has a friend contact him in a state of depression, I almost guarantee you there will be a lift of spirit in the room. So Glass says, how is it possible? And the truth is, that's what the Tzemach Tzedek is talking about. If you distract your thoughts, even the most powerful thoughts, and you focus on something interesting, stimulating, arousing, that's positive, you will shift from your mood, even if it's a horrific mood. So this is so incredibly important. And the Tzemach Tzedek said this 200 years ago. He didn't need modern psychology to tell us this. We already knew this in the Torah. All these things were already apparent in the Torah for us. And obviously not just 200 years ago, but thousands of years ago as well. The reason for this ability is that through removing your thoughts, fear will also disappear. This is how the mind works. Why does the mind work like this? And this is the power of cognitive behavioral therapy and the power of the Torah, is that our minds are built upon our thoughts that affect our emotions, that affect our actions. This is what cognitive behavioral therapy says. But the Kabbalah said this thousands of years ago. The Sfirot also show that we start with thoughts, we go to feelings, and we go to our actions. So how do we know that? So Chachma Bina Dat is our thoughts. Chachma Bina Das, Chesed Gevur Tiferet. Chesed Gevur Tiferet is our emotions. Chesed is love, and Gevur is Yira, is fear. Netzach, Hod, Yisud, Malchut are actions. Netzach is the right leg, and Hod is the left leg, and so it's what moves us. It's our bodies. So we know that the mind works in the same way that the Tzemach Tzedek is talking about. So if we shift our mind, we shift our emotions. And if we shift our thoughts, we shift our feelings, and we shift our behaviors. I'll give you a perfect example. I give to all my clients that suffer from anxiety. I give this to children, I give this to adults. You're in bed late at night, it's 12 o'clock at night, you're under your covers, you're right about to go to sleep, and you hear a scratching at the window. And you think it's a robber. How do you feel? Anybody? Really scared. I'm like, bump, 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 bump. Call the 911. But then you suddenly realize it's just some leaves that are touching the window. How do you feel now? You feel great. So how did it happen? 1 second ago, you're terribly frightened, you're falling apart, you're terribly depressed or excited, and another minute you're okay. How do you go from terrible depression or terrible fear to happiness in a second? Within a few seconds, right? You'll calm down. The answer is, where I put my mind is where I go. And this is what Frankel was saying, and this is what we're talking about at Tzemach Tzedek. We have to place our mind on higher things, despite our conditions. The key to forgetting your thoughts, as a Tzemach Tzedek, is to absorb your mind on other matters, especially matters of this world that arouse happiness. Also, learning Torah makes a person happy, and studying Torah daily at organized times, especially with others, including the revealed Torah and the inner dimensions of Torah, the Chassidut or Kabbalah, can be very helpful. Additionally, says the Tzemach Tzedek, a person should not think of depressing matters. Rather, he should always strive to be happy, as if his heart is happy, even if he doesn't feel this at the moment, since in the end he will feel happy. Isn't that amazing? This is called behavioral psychology. Fake it till you make it. Behave in a certain way. The Sefer Chinuch says, Adam naseh kefi pulasav. A person is created based upon his pu'ula, his actions. He's nifal, he comes into existence. Hergal na'aseh teva, says in the Torah. Repetition creates nature. So, if you want to feel happy, you need to arouse more happiness more frequently. The more you do this, the more you'll experience this happiness. And this is what Tzemach Tzedek says. This is not a modern book of psychology and textbooks. This is the Torah. This is due to the fact that through the repetitive behaviors, a person comes to feel it in their heart. As the Rambam says, a person should do it once, twice, and 3 times until it becomes habit. Hilchot Deot. The main principle is that a person shouldn't focus on matters that bother him and make him scared. Rather, he should do the opposite by focusing on the positive. And by doing so, God pours upon him happiness from above. Isn't that wonderful? What is he referring to? He quotes, he said he heard this from the saintly Shneur Zalman of Liadi, that the Maggid of Mezrich commented on the line, the appearance of man is from above. What does that mean according to the Kabbalah? This means that according to the emotion a person shows from below, this will be shown to him from above. So what it means is that when a person arouses happiness from below, he'll experience this type of spiritual effulgence, this spiritual shekhinah from above, let's say. He'll experience this positivity from above. A person should therefore teach himself to avoid depressing thoughts and to distract his mind from his fears, even when he has a reason to fear something, and especially when there is nothing to fear at all, lo lefached klal, whether it pertains to his health or his finances. How many people dwell in things which they should not fear at all? Raise your hand. I read a study, CNN or Time Magazine years ago. I think 95% of things that people worry about never come true. Think about the things you worry about. Do they actually come true? Most of them do not come true. So if that's true, then we have to be able to focus our minds when our minds wander to things which brings us happiness. It was mentioned a few weeks ago that the Chachamim in Eretz Yisrael said that we shouldn't be, or people should not be watching the news. They're right on. What a phenomenal insight our rabbis have. Because what is as depressing as our news cycle? Nothing. There is nothing as depressing as our news cycle. There is nothing. Maybe they're working with the drug industry to sell antidepressants, So they realize more news, more depressants. The Tzemach Tzedek is saying it cannot allow us to experience depression. There's a difference between anger and sadness versus depression. If we give up our happiness, therefore stop doing mitzvot, and stop supporting Eretz Yisrael, and stop doing what we should do well, we're giving in to the enemy. That's what he said, Ki teitzel u'nachama, that's a war going on. Despite it, we cannot allow ourselves the time to stop our vision of repairing the world, of doing mitzvot, of being kind, learning Torah, raising families. Despite our enemies, we cannot stop. We have to grow twice as fast, despite what they're doing to us. Therefore, a person should teach himself to avoid depressing thoughts and to distract his mind from his fears, even when he has a reason to fear something, and especially when there's nothing to fear. Now, I want to quote to you a very beautiful thing, which I found very moving. He continues to say that the person he was talking to, he said, a strand of loving kindness was drawn upon this, his in-law, the previous summer, and it is known from our rabbis, and I quote from the Gemara on Baba Kama 80, second side B of the page. Listen to this. When a good thing is given to a person, it isn't quickly taken away from him. Very beautiful line from the Gemara. When a person is given something, it is not quickly taken away from him. Baba Kama. People have so many fears if something Baruch Hashem good happens. Bli ayin hara, it's going to be taken away. He quotes the Gemara and saying, stop focusing on that. If something good is given to you, it's not taken away. These fears mentioned are simply ways by which a person's negative inclinations fool him. And thusly, they, meaning the disturbing thoughts, must be thrown away, as it says, and you shall not wander after your hearts and after your eyes, after which you are going astray. In regards to distracting your mind from thinking about transgressing, it is written by the Rambam and Hilchot Avodat Kochavim and so on. Lo sasuru achrei levavchem v'achrei einechem. What draws us towards sadness is our eyes, and we should not be drawn after them and go astray to them. It's a mitzvah then, therefore, to distract and to focus on positive things. So that was the Tzemach Tzedek's letter. So we have Torah telling us to only focus on positive things. We don't need modern psychology to instruct us to do so. When they focus on not only just positive thinking, but positive goals, when they stop hyper-reflecting. If you go to a hospital, which I've been to visiting clients and patients that I've known, the hospital is the most severe place of self-reflection, what Frankl called hyper-reflection on oneself. It's not a simple thing, depression. There's no quick answers for depression. You can't just tell a person, trach gut, wenn sein gut, think good, it'll be good. They have to build it up inside. You have to teach them to learn how to, as we've done in the first two lectures, to watch one's thoughts, to create space from one's thoughts, become more mindful. Hidabroot. We need to teach them to learn about hashgacha pratis, about seeing the world from God's perspective, from a higher perspective, then we also have to help them fulfill meanings in their life. So Frankl would say to somebody, and he dealt with suicidal patients, that was his specialty, what meaning can you fulfill despite your suffering? What meaning can be squeezed out from life? The most simple gestures. He has many stories, and I've read them. I'm also reading a wonderful book. There is a doctor who treats cancer victims. His name is Dr. Bernie Siegel. You ever heard of Dr. Bernie Siegel? He was very big in the 80s and the 90s. He wrote a book called Love, Medicine, and Miracles. Very, very beautiful book. And he would see that an attitudinal shift in a person suffering from cancer could change their lives. It could delay the progression of cancer, and in some case heal people. Or it could assist the medication. He didn't believe chas v'shalom, you just think good, it will be good. I mean, in the sense of a cancer, you have to treat it with medicine and radiation, all the things, chemotherapy. But he says that the attitude towards positive thinking can assist how the medication works in a person. There's a mechanism, he believes, that people choose to die. Some people, they give up hope. In fact, he changes, just think about what he says, he changes the words. When somebody has cancer, people think death sentence. He says, change it to, it's a challenge. That slight change is remarkable. Death sentence to challenge. Challenge is something you could fight against. He wanted people to fight against the illness, to fight to live, not to give up hope. So we know, if it works with people that are physically ill, it also works with people that are psychologically ill, that despite what they're going through, they still have to squeeze out some small meaning to begin with where they're in the hospital, treating people nicely, asking others how they're feeling, working towards that with them. Gradually, you start switching from hyper-reflection to goal orientation, towards finding more meaning in one's life. And therefore, one could overcome depression. There are times, however, that people need medication, there's no question. Sometimes depression is organic, it's physiological, it's based upon disease in the body. So I can't just say positive thinking changes all depression, but there are cases where but the studies on logotherapy, I could tell you, for example, he showed scientifically that 20% of most depressions are based upon a person's lack of meaning. Not every depression is based upon lack of meaning. 20% of depressions are. And he said that, and you can see this from our society, people that just watch videos all day long get terribly depressed. Have you ever watched anybody watch videos all day and be happy? I've never met these people. I mean, it's fun to watch a video for one video or two videos, but 20 a day or 10 a day, you've seen people, maybe you know kids or teenagers that do this. It only leads towards tremendous depression, right? So, however, we know that a person who, we know for a fact that today's disease, people call me up with questions about teens at risk all the time today. It's speeding up. Our meaninglessness is speeding up. In fact, Frankl predicted that the greatest challenge to mental health in the 20th and 21st century would be what he called the existential vacuum. The lack of meaning would be the greatest threat to the modern world. Friends, I have to tell you that, and I'll say this on camera for Hidabroot, that the proliferation of drugs and marijuana in our society are going to destroy our country. No question about it. It is increasing meaninglessness at such a speed that the threat is coming up behind us. We don't even aware of what we're facing right now. Where marijuana can be walked into and bought in a store and 18-year-olds can buy it. We're facing a tremendous disease right now in our society, despite what people say. And the science is there. The science is that marijuana is a very destructive drug and it causes more depression and more anxiety, and it's a gateway to other behaviors, and it causes weight gain and hypertension and all these terrible things and cancer and stuff. But it all points to just a greater lack of meaning in our lives. That's why people want it. They're lacking meaning. Somebody that has meaning, somebody that has a sense of purpose doesn't turn to drugs. Unless, God forbid, they're in pain, I understand, for cancer treatment. But what I'm talking about is this great plague of lack of meaning. And many people I see that have depression lack meaning. It's incredible. And I was saying before, this man that had depression, I was telling you the story that had come to me, and he suddenly started feeling better. What was his switch? Where did I see him get healthier? When I started talking to this fellow about writing his ideas, publishing his work, teaching other people, he started shifting his depression from a tremendous self-focus of what he called hyper-reflection towards achieving something. And the minute he made that, this is what Frankl predicted, then he made that switch from meaninglessness, from purposelessness to a sense of meaning, people start climbing out of their depression. So it's so incredibly important to focus on meaning and also to arouse very positive thoughts. So let me give you a psychological technique on how to do this effectively. So now, there's a wonderful book written called Simply Positivity. I suggest it's a great reading. And this woman, her name is Dr. Barbara Fredrickson. How do I know about this book? One of my very depressed patients came to me, and he was working with a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist recommended that this person reads this book. So I read the book. He told me about it. So it's a great book because she did some fantastic studies on the power and the importance of positive thinking, positivity. Now, what did she show in her studies? She showed they had two different groups of students. And one group of students, they're both given the same task. They had to write some type of test or do some type of difficult task. So one group, they showed some very sad or frightening movies too. And the other group, they showed pictures of babies laughing and people touching, petting puppies or something, puppies playing around. And they were happy. And they showed scientifically that the group that had the positive imagery was able to accomplish this task and be more successful on the test, or the task they had to accomplish. So what we've learned scientifically is that we need to arouse positive states to be more successful. Those who experience more positivity are often more successful. Those who delve in negativity find it very hard to be successful. So you have to arouse that simcha in order to accomplish more. So she said that it's extremely important to keep up a ratio, and the ratio should be 4-to-1. 4 positive to any 1 negative, the 4-to-1 ratio. She shows it scientifically. It's a bit controversial. People criticize her. You can't show a scientific proportion of happiness versus sadness. But she said she believed, actually Rabbi Spetner, who some of you probably know from Yerushalayim, my wife used to go to the classes, and she said the same thing. This was 25 years ago. Rabbi Spetner says you have to have 4 positive words to your kids versus 1 negative word. 4-to-1. So this is coming up in Emet all around the world. So she explains that if you're in a 4-to-1 negative ratio, 4 negative thoughts, 1 positive thought, you're going to be depressed. So you have to switch it to 4 positive to 1 negative. Okay. And go ahead and make it 7-to-1 also. You can go as high as you want. You don't have to just stop there, but let's say minimally you should be at 4-to-1. So she created something. Now, our mothers told us this. Our great-grandparents knew this. They used to call it making a gratitude list. Isn't that simple? Make a gratitude list. But she shows the science of gratitude in her book. And she actually has people create what she calls a positivity portfolio. A positivity portfolio is built upon making this file cabinet of positivity, a positivity happiness drawer. What is in this portfolio? Now, there are 10 portfolios. Imagine 10 folders. Or imagine 10 folders on your computer, on your Windows. So what is in each portfolio? The first one, no specific word, but here are the 10 things, 10 portfolios. Joy, gratitude, serenity, interest, hope, pride, amusement, inspiration. I'll say them again at the end if I'm writing and speaking the way. Awe and love. So I'll say them again. 10 portfolios are joy, gratitude, serenity, interest, hope, pride, amusement, inspiration, awe, and love. Now, what do you do with these 10 things? She says, you make your 10 portfolios, and you take, let's just take one, joy. So put in that portfolio all your memories of joy your whole life. Pictures, mementos, yearbook pictures, videos. I mean, physically, I don't know, you put them in a folder, but okay. You make a note where to find the video on your computer. Pictures, cards, books that made you happy, that gave you joy. Write down experiences, weddings, bris, bar mitzvahs, simchot, I know, whatever you've experienced. When your parents took you to Six Flags, I don't know. Something that was fun in your childhood. Going to Yerushalayim, visiting Eretz Yisrael. And put that in that folder and build and build and build. And the next folder, gratitude, things you have gratitude towards. So you want to mention Kadosh Baruch Hu, you want to mention your parents, if they've been helpful to you. You want to mention a teacher who was good to you. I sometimes daydream. We really repress our positive thoughts, honestly now. We really repress them. If you're depressed, you're probably not thinking about all the good things that happened to you. There's probably many good things happen to you, even if you've had a hard life. A teacher was nice to you in second grade, a cousin who was friendly, a parent who gave you love despite their poverty or despite their conditions, despite their fears, a grandparent who was nice to you, somebody in shul gave you a candy, the person that let you buy their home could have sold it to somebody else. Wow. Why did you get it? Your mortgage broker who got your mortgage, somebody at the bank that did a favor for you, somebody, a neighbor that helped you with something, somebody picked up your kid from school. I don't know. You can make your own list, but you get the point. So put that in your gratitude file and build it. Pictures, notes, memories, videos. So you go down the line. Serenity, times where you were serene. Went to the park, you had a nice time. Think about going to the mountains. Think about being in camp. If you went to camp as a kid or as an adult, you went up to the mountains. Serenity, interest, things that made you interested. When did you find a deep sense of interest? For us, it's not Torah. We found something in Torah we loved. We found the Parsha fascinating. We found the Gemara interesting. We found Kabbalah, Hasidut, Hashkafa, something that was fascinating. We just wanted to learn and study, and all these beautiful Svarim here. We opened them up, the Rambam. We found it fascinating. We studied it. Interest, hope. When did we feel hopeful in life? We hope things would work out well. When do we sense feelings of pride? We're proud that our children accomplished. We're proud that we finished something. Amusement parks, joy, fun. When were we inspired? Which Gedolim, Chachamim did we sit in front of and say, wow. Some great lecturers in New York, we sat in front of these people and we said, wow. When we were in awe, at the Kotel, in front of the rabbis, and when did we experience love? When did we feel love for other people? When have people loved us? When did we feel towards a child? When, even if we're angry at them, but we did love them at some point. When did we feel love? Our spouse. When do they love us? Our parents, our teachers. Keep on going. Grandparents, cousins. Put them all in this fund. Now, what does she say you need to do? In her book, she says you make a chart during the day. You see, when am I feeling sad? When am I feeling happy? She wants you to chart out your day. So, from 9 to 10, 9 to 11, I was feeling good. I went to work. Things were good. From 11 to 12, I went down a little bit. Somebody said something to me I didn't like. I felt a bit sad. Chart your day. Came home, felt a little happier. Fought with the kids during homework. Felt a little sad, Chart it out. So what do you do now that you know when you're sad? She says, when you're sad, now open up your positivity portfolio. Time for this folder. Pull out the joy folder. I guarantee it works. It works like William Glasser says it works when you're terribly depressed and your best friend calls you up you haven't seen in 25 years. You're happier. This is the same thing. How do you know if something is fear or anxiety? What's the difference? So, someone used a great term. I was counseling a couple today. The woman turns to me and she says, even paranoids have enemies, she said to me. Fascinating. So, how does somebody know whether the fear is real or not? Is it a fear or anxiety? Okay. The answer is and I treat people with OCD that have persistent fears that don't go away. So how do you know the difference? So the answer is like this. Fear, real fear, is temporary. Car's going to hit you, slam the brakes, temporary. Dog's going to bite you, run away, hit the dog. That's a fear. Test is coming up, it's finished tomorrow. It's limited in time, right? Anxiety is endless. Endless. Depression, endless. You will ruminate, obsess, be fearful of over and over and over again. Not for a few minutes, not for a day, for days, weeks, months, years. So, time limit. Second of all, I'm answering your question. Fear is mobilizing. The dog's going to bite, I hit, I run. Car's going to crash, hit the brake, or speed away. Mobilizing, I'm doing something about it. Fear is paralyzing. Now you begin to know. My rule for people with OCD is, you can think about something for 1 minute, but after 1 minute, it's OCD. Stop thinking about it. So I'm trying to answer your question, right? In that you have to confront what's going wrong, but you can't dwell on the negativity of the situation. That's all. The question is, does it keep on reverberating the negativity? Of course, you have to act. You have to confront. You have to deal with. You have to stop people from doing wrong things. You know, work is toxic. Business environments, schools, organizations are all toxic, right?
So you could switch your job, or you could change your thoughts. So
you could leave. It's not easy to leave. You can't just find a new job. So you have to accept some suffering in the workplace. It's going to be part of every situation anybody's ever worked in. There's been toxicity. So one could shift one's attitude towards it. You can follow the Tzemach Tzedek, who says, despite your fears, despite the chariots and this great nation, your boss coming at you, you could distract yourself from, you could play political games as best you can to survive in that organization. But the question is, does it drag you to a point where you can't function? And that's what we're talking about tonight. That you have to shift your attitudes despite my conditions. I mean, what could be worse than Auschwitz for Viktor Frankl? But despite one's conditions, can one squeeze out a attitudinal shift despite my working environment? And this will be prevalent through all areas of life when one's confronting problems, persistent problems. How does one respond to an inescapable suffering? Being in a bad job is inescapable suffering. I mean, it's not Auschwitz, you can just leave, but you might lose a lot of money, so it's pretty bad, you know? So the question is, can you squeeze out some attitude, a different attitude towards it? Despite my suffering, I will accomplish certain tasks at my work that are meaningful to me on a human level, despite my angry boss. And the other thing is, there's probably a lot of the time there's nothing to fear at all until the pink slip comes. We don't really know what happens in companies until the last minute. So do you spend a lot of time dwelling in the future and the fear of the future, or do you shift towards a positivity state? You can choose. You're going to get fired either way. You may be fired, you may not be fired, but how much suffering will you experience? And could you perhaps arouse some feelings of positivity to give you more strength? That would be the question. So you can pull out your portfolio and try to utilize it. But advice was given to me many years ago by one of my Rabbi, and he said, never quit a job.
Really?
Be fired. Because we walk around wondering when we're going to be fired, so sometimes we run too early. So wait till you're fired to get fired, and then, but if you want to look for, he didn't say you couldn't look for another job. Start looking if you have to, but don't run. Because you don't know what can change at any moment, unless you're a Navi, but if you're not, you know, you may not know what's happening around the corner. And then you really want to do what we talked about last week, is who's in control, your boss or God? Perhaps God is stronger than your boss or your principal, I don't know. But, you know, we believe he is, so then you turn to Hashem, you daven, you ask for help. That's where we want to go with our feelings in life, towards God, or focusing on positive things, or what she's mentioning is pulling out these positivity portfolios. Those things are helpful to us no matter what we're experiencing. In fact, the way I talk about anxiety, there's no one answer fits all, or for depression. I always use a muscle like you're whittling away at it. You're taking pieces. It's like a pie. You don't just get rid of somebody's anxiety or their depression. You often take away pieces of it. When I have somebody with anxiety, I throw all my armaments. I throw everything at them. could take a few weeks. I'll give them every technique to see which one will work. So I'll do cognitive behavior therapy. I'll confront their thoughts, negative self-beliefs about themselves, distortions, black and white thinking. We've talked about it in previous videos. I will shift towards positive thinking. I'll do more mindfulness techniques to help them watch their thoughts as opposed to reacting to them. If necessary, they'll have to take medication if they're falling apart. There's all these, or they can't cope with the pain of their anxiety or depression. They'll have somebody with anxiety do a lot of exercise, because exercise releases adrenaline, it gets rid of adrenaline in the body, which causes more anxiety. I'll do breathing techniques with the person. I'll teach them distraction techniques like counting backwards. I'll have them describe things with their mind, do Hidabroot meditations. We'll try to fight them from every different level to help them overcome what they're going through. I'll help them develop more meaningful friendships in their life, despite their anxieties. I'll read Viktor Frankl with them if it's inescapable pain they're experiencing. We want to do a lot of things. It's not like do this for that, but you need to confront it, you need to daven, but you need to arouse. What the Tzemach Tzedek is really saying is, arousing positivity is the precursor to everything else. If you don't arouse positivity, you go back into the slump, you're inactive, so to speak. Positivity gives us the ability to do more. So try to arouse that through positivity portfolios to give you strength to do more davening and more reaction.
Just like
you do therapy, you daven, you develop friendships, meaningful friendships in your life, despite your anxiety. You take on tasks of loving other people more effectively, giving to others, volunteering, despite your pain you're experiencing. You exercise, you learn more Torah, you commit to learning Torah, you commit to finishing portions of the Torah, giving you goals and acquiring more meaning in your life. You give more tzedakah. You watch your thoughts as opposed to reacting to your thoughts. You learn to breathe differently, breathing techniques to relax your body. You help a person learn how to do stretching. One of the things I want to mention, and we'll finish on this point, is anxiety, I find, has a very powerful physiological component. When somebody comes to me suffering from anxiety, it's more than just their thoughts or their feelings, it's their bodies in pain. Heartbeats and breathing and tension and backaches and stomach aches and nausea. So you have to help a person also relieve their anxiety through stretching, through breathing. But not everybody likes to be taught how to breathe differently. Most people find it strange in the Western world. Breathe in for 4, hold for 6, out for 7. I do this with people, but most people don't like it. They're not going to breathe differently. It's very Eastern. They don't like breathing, unless they like yoga or something. So I'll say then, so can you just do stretching? I have people with terrible anxiety. I teach them a stretch in my office. Here, hold your foot and pull this way, and this, breathe into it for a second. They go, oh, it feels a little better, because they're holding on to so much stress in their bodies from the anxiety. You have to also help them relieve. So swimming is an incredible thing for anxiety. Biking with your kids, if you can do it safely, is a great activity. So there's a lot of things you could physically do to, But also, and I'll really conclude on this point, is that I often find that the greatest way to overcome depression and anxiety is to ask yourself the question, what will I achieve next in my life despite my anxiety? That is Viktor Frankl. What will I work on now despite what I'm experiencing? And focus on that. That's what Frankl says we need to do. And I think he's right on. Despite my anxiety, which may be chronic, it may be biological, it may be environmental, but despite, this is the key word, despite it, what will I achieve more than what I'm achieving now in my life? Who will I love more? What will I see in life? What will I learn? What will I create? What will I do? This is the essence of positive psychology, is that it's focused on acquiring more meaningful life, as opposed to more self-focus. This is what the Lubavitcher Rabbi said. He said that, what does it mean, Trachgut ben Zainkud? The story goes that the Tzemach Tzedek told the story, the Frierdiker Rebbe told the story of the Tzemach Tzedek, that a man came to him, his son was dying, deadly ill, And the Tzemach Tzedek replied to the father, Trach gut wenn sei gut, think good will be good. And the son recovered, and then he started positive thinking. Now this is a very powerful story. It may confuse certain people, maybe even doubt the story. But the Rebbe explains that, he says like this, a person needs to develop bitachon, an exclusive way to God, which implies that he relies and depends on God alone to the extent that he casts his lot entirely upon him, as it is written, cast your burden upon Hashem. That the person has no other dependency in the world except God. And he quotes the duties of the heart, Hovot HaVavot, that says that it's like a slave that's thrown in a pit, with a lock on top of it, and the only person that could get him out of his situation is his master. According to Chavot HaVavot, he says that this is the foundation of our trust, that we turn to God with everything we have. We say, God, I've tried everything else. This will be the last answer to how do you relieve anxiety. I've tried everything else. I've tried every technique in the book. I've been through therapy. I've tried medication. I've tried learning. I've tried loving people. I've tried exercise. I have nothing left. It's not working. Only you can help me right now. This is what the Rebbe says is how we turn to God. That's what it means, trachkud v'enzaikud. That this, if we turn to God fully, God turns to us, anthropomorphically speaking. And this is where we experience miraculous recovery, or change from our state of being. It's entering into an entirely new dimension of positive thinking. It's called conscious determinism. Despite my condition, I can actually change reality. I know there's people that question this, but he's talking about in severe situations, in situations where there's a sense of helplessness, he says, casting your fears. And I've seen this happen with people. I've had people in my office that have been desperate. I say, I want you to totally turn towards God with everything you have and ask Him alone to change your situation. And sometimes it's been helpful. So that would be another thing. That's the ultimate expression of think good, it will be good, that one could accomplish. And she already mentioned she's experienced it in her own personal way.